Yes. Oh, the United States Air Force. 315,000 men and women on active duty throughout the world. In addition, about 175,000 people serve in the Air Force Reserve. Oh, or the Air National Guard, and then there's 170,000 civilians. Now, I was a little concerned because I thought this idea of trafficking in children, child abuse, and the violating of the civil rights of American citizens had some significance to those that are in the Air Force. Could you get me the aluminum manufacturing everywhere in the United States and in the continent of Africa? I noticed that aluminum takes a lot of electricity, and somebody had sewn the electric grid into my ass and electrocuted me numerous times. Yeah. When we look at the actual manufacturing of aluminum in this nation and in the continent of Africa, yes, I'd like to know where they generate the electricity that continent is using. Yeah. Now, knowing what I know about aluminum, somebody was concerned about global warming. And as much as the Air Force doesn't like to talk about the cover, yes, I thought aluminum was quite often being used to shield the nation from the sun because of global warming concerns, where I had read some weather engineering studies that thought that it would be best if we continued to spray the United States with pulverized aluminum, thereby reducing the amount of global warming. And they call it the Shield of Ra. Yeah. The RA. It's kind of like the Pharaoh. Yes. Well, if you put a shield over the nation to shield it from the sunlight, it would cause global warming to not be such a problem. Now, you know my take on this global warming, and my thought was we should freeze the upper atmosphere, and using steam to do that would be the most economical way. You know, when you're evaporating water, yes, just fresh water because I desalinated at the Red Sea and in the other ocean. And you're using new recruits for the Air Force to fly those airplanes where they just dump the water anywhere in the north part or the south part of Africa. A lot of that water, when it evaporates, it's a very high temperature type of atmosphere over the desert. Yes. And it could cause a great amount of the reduction of global warming that we're spending billions upon billions of dollars studying as if it were such a big problem. Now, as a citizen, yes, that realizes that there's a twofold reason for doing this, yes. Because when you look at aluminum, yeah, it does use a tremendous amount of electricity. But here's the country of Africa, or the continent of Africa. Ouch. Here, let's look at it again so I could show you. Let's say, oh, a civil rights movement in African literature. Shut up. I know it's Martin Luther King's holiday here in just a couple of days. But the Air Force doesn't support. Now, this is interesting, okay? Average July temperatures over 90 degrees right along this area right here. See, a lot of people, when I explained my want of desalinating, oh, well, it's pretty close to the tropical cancer. See, the only reason I didn't go along this is the number of nations involved. Yes, it was, see, there's only one, two, three, four, five nations if you just do it right there. Getting agreements with those nations to provide fresh water in exchange for me being able to put a long hose across the Sahara. Now, I was thinking probably 4 to 500 billion gallons of fresh water. Now, a lot of people say it's a waste of money. I could make these out of recycled tires, and I think Africa has a lot of old tires that they're not using. Yes, I could smelter them up. I could form an actual, well, 6 to 10 feet diameter hose across the Sahara. You don't really have to bury it because there's not a lot of housing out there. Yes, and then I could evaporate all that water. Now, a lot of it would end up in the upper atmosphere. Then using these planes to dump it on the parts that are not as hot. Yes. And then what would happen is some of it would end up in the actual atmosphere where it would blow throughout the whole world and eventually it would rain in the Seattle area. Now, when you're thinking about desalinating that much, yes, a solar furnace seems to be a very economical way of being able to do this. Now, you would think with the amount of sunlight that they get in July, yes, 100 times the actual magnification of the sun, yes. Uh, it's possible that I could desalinate at, well, 4 to 8,000 degrees. Now, I know they say, well, we're going to run out of seawater. And I thought, no, at those temperatures, now I know we're going to spend billions upon billions of dollars on the stupidest fucking ideas ever invented. You know, Governor, I don't give a shit what you write in any newspaper. When you refuse to enforce the civil rights of Americans, you get sued and get to spend some time in a same-sex prison. Ouch. Now, you want to fix global warming? Yeah. My desalinators, the HHO gas, and then the 10-story tall solar furnaces that I called a magnifying glass. I gave the example that I had learned at a very young age that if you position a magnifying glass so that the sunlight hits it, yes, it will start a fire. Coach. Now, the only question about how hot that beam of light would get, yes, is how big a magnification of the magnifying glass, yes, and how much of the sunlight that it traps, yes, yes, yes. See, a magnifying glass this size, a cell phone size, the normal size that most people use for reading, yes, um, it it can be magnified multiples. But you take a magnifying this size, right, and you put it 10 stories tall, yes, and you position it so that the sunlight hits all 10 stories, yes, it will desalinate an immense amount of water. Now, the only question is how to pump it across the desert. I designed a pump that does that using the movement of the waves. Yes, there is no actual mechanics involved in it. Now, the thought of us as a nation talking about global warming as this, if you want to cool the United States, you could start by cooling the Sahara. Now, it sounds stupid, but solar furnaces that are positioned at the right. Oh, you thought I was dumb wanting to put a water hose across the Sahara Desert. Listen, you dumb fucking elected oaths of office. Why don't you just